Hi, my name is Cheryl. I am going to give you a presentation where I'm going to tell you that it's very important to speak in the language that your audience will understand, and I'm going to do that not in Hungarian. So I work for a company called Northwest Cadence. We're located in Seattle in the United States, and I've spent a lot of time over the last 15 months here with Dealogic in Budapest. Love the company, love the people, really love your city. And I'm very grateful that you guys agreed to have me and have some short talk on some of the things that I try to teach the folks here at Dealogic and my other clients about how to make Agile more effective, especially in large enterprises. So how many of you work for, say, medium or larger size companies rather than little tiny ones? Okay. So we're going to talk about how to make Agile more successful when you, as technology people, may be working with people that do not have a technology background and are not familiar with Agile. See if this is the right button. Yes. So why do we care? Many of you know why we care. This is my favorite reason. Right? I don't know if you can read this one. This was new today. I love it. More office workers are switching to fetal position desks. They find it is healthier to curl up in a little ball. Just get started early. That, of course, that's from The Onion. In a larger organization, this is the reality of Agile for a lot of teams. Water scrum fall. Have you seen this before? So it's lots of waterfall at the beginning. Your heroic teams are working in little agile iterations, and then there's a lot of stabilization and a lot of stuff with IT before you can get it released. Oftentimes when we're doing Agile, this is what we're really doing. And where we feel pain, we have friction between the parts of our organization that are Agile and the parts of the organization that are not. Especially if they don't understand the benefit of Agile for them. So for these people, for your product people, your business, maybe your IT, maybe your managers or your management, for those people, often they see Agile as this annoying thing that our technology people want to do, and they keep telling me I have to change my behavior and I don't want to. But we know that the reason we do Agile is not, it might be to make our own lives better. It does do that. But the benefits of Agile are to make the entire organization better. The challenge is these people don't get the benefits if they don't play. And if they're not involved and they don't see those benefits, they don't know why they should. It's a cycle. So let's talk about what are some better ways to try to engage the people in our organization who aren't technology. Because I'll tell you something that does not work. Telling them that Ken Schwaber said that in Scrum we shouldn't have any managers does not make managers like Scrum. Talking to product people and sales people about something we call technical debt. We think that's a great metaphor to help them understand it. It is not. They don't get it. But there's some things we'll be able to help them get. So I like to know the history of things. I always like to know how we got here. Extreme programming. Did anybody do extreme programming? Yes. Some of you are as old as me. Agile Manifesto, surprisingly, 2001. I thought a lot earlier. Companies were doing iterative development. I didn't include unified process, right? Rational unified process, rational rows, old times. But the manifesto for Agile, all of these things came from the imagination of developers. They came from the coding side of the organization. We came up with these methodologies through observation. The folks who got together in Snowbird, Utah, and wrote the Agile manifesto, some of the great thinkers in Agile, were pretty much developers. And what they said we are writing down is, we have observed that when we work this way, it works better. So this is experiential. Meanwhile, anybody know who that guy is? Nobody ever knows. Do you know who he is?
I guess I'm not sure.
Okay. Anybody know? You're very close. It is not actually Mr. Toyota, but it's a dude from Toyota. His name is Taiichi Ono, and he's considered to be the father of the Toyota production system. Right? We all know what this is. This is what I think is super powerful about the Toyota production system. In 2001, Jeffrey Liker, wrote a book called The Toyota Way that completely transformed industry. I think I give this talk in Detroit. Developers in Detroit know who Taiichi Ono is. They know really, really well. But it's because the ideas from the Toyota production system transformed assembly lines. They changed the way we deliver things. UPS, FedEx, DHL all took ideas from Toyota to make the kind of rapid delivery possible that supports things like Amazon and chances are some of your businesses. So TPS was a big deal. And especially when the Toyota Way was published in English. In the States at least, business schools make that required reading for their business candidates. People need to understand this stuff. It changed business. So we have an organization full of business people who do not have a technology background. We know this stuff because we grew up in it. We built our careers on the things that the great Agile thinkers know. But our product guys and our senior management built their careers on the stuff that guy wrote. They know this stuff. And here's what's really transformative about it. Underneath it all, they are the same thing in very many important ways. The things that we know about Agile are things that our predecessors came up with from their own experience. They observed that this was working. My boss, Steve, who's really big on theory, likes to say, that's all well and good in practice, but does it work in theory? And it does. There are theories to describe why the things in Agile work. The folks who wrote the manifesto didn't necessarily care about that. They knew it worked. The guys who wrote Scrum, they knew it worked. But the reason we can prove that it works is that we can tie it back to things that people learn in business school, like queuing theory, like theory of constraints, basic statistical analysis. There's some things that they learn that if we understand that these are the same things, and we understand better what were they taught, what words were used to describe the things the way they learned them, and how do those connect to the Agile that we know? When we can bring those things together, we can have a conversation with someone who isn't technical and help them understand the benefits of Agile in a way that they care about. When we do it with technical jargon, they shut down because they don't understand us. But when we do it in a language that they understand, we are much more likely to get the kind of changes in their behavior that we are hoping to get. So far, so good? Yes? Let's talk about some specifics. Anybody familiar with the book by Donald Reinertsen, Principles of Product Development Flow? All right, so you hardcore geeks, if you really want to read about economic theory and lean product development, it's a textbook. It's a big, thick book. I have not read it. However, I work with really smart guys who have read it, and they told me what it said. So, good enough for me. I'm really bad about reading things. Reinertsen outlines a number of key principles. It's not specifically about software. It's about product development. And he talks about how the ideas from the Toyota production system and from Lean can be used to improve product development. which is what we do in software. And so I've cherry-picked a couple of my favorites. I do not have time to tell you about a whole textbook today. But the first one of them is something that's fairly important to know if you are thinking that you want to understand more about those lean principles. Specifically, not all lean is alike. We know, for example, that we're not an assembly line. My software is not a car. And most importantly, when I build software, I am not building the same piece of software twice. Hopefully ever. We all know we've done it, right? But we don't do it on purpose. So whenever I build something, in software development, I am creating something that hopefully has never been created before. That's why I'm building it. If there's another one already out there, I'd like to acquire it and use it. I'd like to download that library and interface with it. I don't want to write it again. Chances are, if it's already out there, it's better than what I was going to write anyway. But the point is, there's no satisfaction in writing software that somebody else has already written. There's also no money in it. If it is already out there, why would somebody pay you to write it? So you're always doing something that's not been done before. And that is radically different from an assembly line where we are building thousands of cars and we would like them to all be exactly the same. Totally different mindset. It doesn't mean that lean doesn't work for us. It means there's a specific thing we need to change in our understanding of lean. And this is what Reinertsen explains this really well. But the thing that's different for us is that variability. The stuff we do will vary. When we have variability, it means we have unknowns. Unavoidable. The only way for me to know perfectly how the software is going to be built, how it's going to work, and how long it's going to take would be if I've already done it. And then I go, look, how long did it take? That's the only way for me to have perfect knowledge. That means in the real world, when I'm planning ahead, I will not have perfect knowledge. The interesting thing about it economically is the less I know, the more risky the thing is. Chances are the more valuable it is. Because maybe if it's a very difficult or risky problem, no one else has ever done it before. And anybody who wants this problem solved would probably pay more to see me solve it. Risky things are rewarding things. They provide business value. So you don't need to apologize for the fact that you don't know things that you don't know. But you do need to connect with, let's say, your product people, your business people, and help them understand that those risks are a natural part of software development. It doesn't mean that it's a failing by you. It doesn't mean you don't know your job. It probably means you're working on the cutting edge of your job. That's a good thing. And now we want to have techniques that will help us manage that risk in a very aware way. We know that risk is there. We now want to manage it. We're not going to get rid of it. We're not going to standardize and make everything predictable. It's not going to happen. The good news is there are ways to manage risk that don't require us to standardize and turn ourselves into assembly lines. If we did that, we'd lose all our value. So we know from Agile that a lot of the tools we use to deal with variability are things like, if I have a big, scary, unknown problem, I would like to break it down into many small problems. I want to decompose my large features into a bunch of small implementations. Because, I'll make up a number, 80% of them are things I probably do know how to do, and the risk is concentrated in 20% of them. By breaking it down, I can isolate that risk and manage it better. The smaller the thing is, if I need to give an estimate on it, I'm going to be a lot more confident in my estimate of a very small thing because of margin of error. A very small thing has a margin of error about this much. A very large thing has a margin of error that's some kind of percentage. It's about this much. Your variance is a lot bigger. So we deal with variability by trying to take those unknowns and make them smaller. kind of talks about management metrics to me. Because one of our favorite metrics is utilization. And it's probably, well, no, there are worse metrics. Lines of code is a worse metric. But utilization is really down there. I have actually done business with a company, one of our clients, who is using Team Foundation Server tied to their timesheet system, and their timesheet system is tied to the door entry card. He's covering his face. I know, it's that bad. It's just that bad. And so when people beep in and out of the door, TFS gets updated. That's not cool. Does anybody think that's telling them anything true? I work with a lot of clients who have anxiety if people are not sitting at their desk, looking busy. And the anxiety from management and from the product side comes from this dream that if everybody is as busy as possible, surely that means we are developing the software as fast as possible. And if I can prove that we were super busy the whole time that we were 3 months late with our deliverable, but we were really busy, obviously that makes it okay. And we know that that's not true. But the main reason we know that's not true, I think, is it's not, my colleague Andrew makes the joke, if that were the case, if it really was about how busy we need to be as developers, testers, BAs, if it was really about our individual productivity and making each individual as productive as possible was the key to delivering software faster, then we could improve all of your organizations tomorrow by sending you all to typing school. Because that would make the code faster. But we know that's not true, because we know it's not the individuals. Kanban uses a technique called value stream mapping. Has anybody heard of that? It's very interesting. You actually take, let's say, sticky notes or a whiteboard or whatever, and you just sit down with everybody and you describe exactly everything that has to happen to a piece of software from the time somebody thinks it up to the time it goes into production. All the things that have to happen. And you identify the touch time, when are people doing things to it, but you also identify the waiting time. Kanban boards are a really good way of exposing that too, right? Wait time. The reality is our software spends most of its life sitting around waiting for somebody to do something to it. And that's what causes our cycle time to be as long as it is, not how individually productive we are. So if we focus on something like that, if I just describe to a business person, why did this take so long? Well, I was waiting for a week to get an answer to a question, and then it took me an hour to code it. That is useful information that they need to have. Making that kind of thing visible is very helpful, and that didn't require any technical jargon. Are you all familiar with work in process, the notion of work in process from Kanban? I know a lot of businesses in Budapest are using Kanban. I've heard about that you are. Okay. Work in process, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, pretty simple concept. It's the idea of how many things you have in an active state at a time, at any one time, a snapshot. And so when we think about what a software team will do, the things that, for example, if you do Scrum, you commit to a bunch of things, you pull them into your iteration, they all go into a more or less active state. Maybe you start all of them on day one of your sprint. Maybe you only start a few of them on the day of your sprint, and then you start others later when you have capacity. That, whatever you're touching at that moment, that's your work in process. There's a thing I didn't put on the slide, but there's a thing called Little's Law that teaches us, it's math, it's one of them formulas, that shows us that reducing your work in process is proven to shorten your cycle time. Cycle time is the amount of time from when you start the thing, when it goes into active, to the time you finish it. That's your cycle time. And so if you look at, in Scrum we do things with story points and we measure velocity in our sprints, so we're focused on the bucket of iteration. What Kanban asks us to do is measure the individual items. How fast did this one get done? How fast did this one get done? In Scrum, if you're doing it correctly, your average cycle time will be less than whatever your iteration length is. Might be a lot less, it might be right at the length. So say you're doing 2-week sprints, your average cycle time is going to be less than 2 weeks if you do everything in your sprint. Of course, if you're cheating, it will be more. The point is this. Scrum is interesting because it gives us a structure that limits work in process without calling it that. We're limiting our work in process in Scrum by choosing our sprint backlog. That smaller piece of work that we say, this is what we're going to focus on during this sprint. That is part of the magic of why Scrum works. They don't specifically say because it ties back to Little's Law, but that is why it works. So as you are able to focus on a smaller number of things in an iteration, each one of those things will be able to be done more quickly. You also get a lot of other benefits from limiting your work in process. Less context switching. Right? You have more focus. You have more drive back to the business to prioritize the things. I'm only going to do these 5. You better choose the 5 you want. So this is a thing that we, as team members, all of our roles, BAs, testers, developers, anybody on a team can, and people don't always believe me when I say this, we can always control our work in process at the team level. Because we have no control over how much they ask us for. They can ask us for the moon. But there's only so many of us. There's only this many hands on keyboards. There's only so many things we will work on at once. You'd have to be a pretty strong micromanager to come in and say, I demand that you start 16 things. Code them all at once. We'll have 2 keywords per person. So your team can control that we've been given 27 things to do, but there are 3 of us. That means we're going to do 2 of them at a time. We'll do them until they are finished, and then we'll do the next ones. Doing it that way, having a limit on your work in process, will give you a lot of different benefits. And you can do this actually kind of without permission. You just do this. You do count blocked work. Right? If stuff is blocked, you don't go find something else to do. You stop and get it unblocked. The point being that the teams, by focusing on, say you have your board with all your work on it, instead of focusing on the effort to get work onto the board, you want to focus on the effort to get work off of the board. So when a product person or a manager comes in and says, now, here's our priorities and these are all the things I want to do, you really want to pull them over to, I'm assuming we're doing a left to right reading language here, because Hungarian. You pull them over to this side. If I speak in Israel, it's different. Okay. You pull them over here to where the done column is, and you say, you see all these things here? Look how close they are to being done. Can you help me push them over the edge and get them all done? You can have these. These are almost ready. Because starting new things when it takes you forever to finish them, starting more things when you still have active work on the board that isn't finished, does not help anybody. You're just piling more stuff in on the back of the train wreck. It doesn't help you. And I've seen, these guys taught me here at Theologic that that is not a management problem, actually. I watched teams argue with their managers and say, no, we need to start more. Part of that is the drive for utilization. I have things blocked, yet I want to be really busy. Surely that will help. But it's more important to focus on finishing. Queues. I mentioned queuing theory. Queuing theory is something from economics and math. So a lot of folks with business backgrounds will understand the theory of queuing, even if they don't fully understand how it applies to the work we do in software. Queues are a bad deal for us. What I mean by a queue is that waiting time. Any time in our life cycle that something has moved in and now it is sitting and it's not actively being touched at this moment. If I started it and then I set it aside, it's waiting. If something came up and interrupted me, I had to shelve a bunch of work, that's waiting. If it's waiting to be deployed to a test environment so my testers can look at it, it's in a queue waiting. And the problem is, those are the things that cause your software to take a long time to deliver, not your productivity. But allowing those queues to build up and allowing that wait time to happen. In the Toyota production system, when they had an inventory backup or a queue backup, because they're dealing with tangible objects, that was very visible. One of the things that Taiichi Ono had them change was they no longer had giant warehouses to hold all their inventory. They had lines painted on the floor that said the inventory has to fit here. So if their assembly line was pushing things too fast and they weren't being pulled and being used, that space would fill up with physical things that you could see. And they'd say, whoa, we've got an inefficiency in the line here somewhere. We need to stop and get everything smooth again so that this inventory won't build up because that's wasteful. If you think about it, when we find a defect further down in the line, in this part, we'd really love to not have 30,000 of these parts already built that we have to go back and fix. We'd like to be able to say, oh, these 3, we'll throw them out. Let's change the design of that part and keep building more. That's some of the benefit of just-in-time in the assembly line world. When queues form in a production system like that, you can physically see them. In our world, the queues are virtual. It's very easy to forget that we have work that is in a waiting state. That's why visual boards like in Kanban are so valuable to us, because we can put the stuff up and see just what kind of mess we're in. So I'm going to show you an example. I'm going to pick on Dialogic. I've actually taken these from them, and you can't read it, so great. TFS. You can't probably see the colors very well, but we can ignore the green. Those are done, yay. We can ignore this. This is the incoming new. But everything else in between on this team's board is in some kind of an active state. So what are some of the first smells you notice on this board? What doesn't look good on this board? An awful lot of stuff. How big do you suppose this team is? It's only about 8 people. That's a lot of stuff for 8 people, unless it's really tiny. It's an awful lot of stuff. I bet it's not that tiny. So here's what I noticed, because you can't see what these columns are, and it kind of doesn't matter. But one of the things that I ask teams to do as we are getting started in Kanban is I ask them to put all their work on a board and then tell me which one of these columns represents active states that the work is having stuff done to it, and which of these columns represent queues. It's just sitting there waiting for something. In this case, we did it a little differently. I asked the team to just tell me how many of these things are actively being worked on by one of you right this minute, today. This was in a stand-up. How many are being touched right now? And this was their answer, because it's not that big a team, and some of them were out on holiday. So those are the things that anybody was actually working on that day. Yikes. Because that means this. That means all that stuff on the board is not actively being worked on. So you can see a couple of queue columns right away, right? Without knowing what the headers are. You can see somewhere that that entire column is a queue. There's actually 2 of them here. This whole thing is a queue. This one's a queue. And they are. They're ready to deploy and ready to test. That one might be a queue. Your committed column is a queue, probably, kind of. You haven't started it yet. Ready to develop is a queue. This is the one that drives me nuts. This one right here. This is the active development column. Now here's the thing. They have a ready to develop column. They have one. So this is all stuff that's made it into the active development column. At some time, somebody on purpose dragged it across and said, it's going into active. And yet, today, in the stand-up, nobody's working on it. They might not even know all of that is true. If all they're doing is looking at a list of the backlog, or they're just standing around with each other and saying, what did I do today, what did I do yesterday? They might not see that all this inventory has built up. They have a lot of stuff. And so I'm thinking, how did this happen? Well, we can be pretty well assured that there's context switching happening here. It means that somebody started this on purpose, but now they're not working on it, but it's not done. So something interrupted them, or they, I don't know, got bored with it. So there isn't an emphasis on finishing that work. So we looked at this, we said, what can we do to fix this problem? Oh yeah, there's one other thing that's bad about this board that you can't quite see, and it's over there on the side. Oh, no, did I take it out, really? Oh, I took it out. There's a scroll bar over here. You can't see it. There's a scroll bar. This screen actually goes down about another screen length. So, sad day for this team. But, amazing. The team looked at this. We had a conversation about the cues on the board. And they went away. I actually went home for like 3 weeks. Went back to Seattle. When I came back from Seattle, we had another stand-up, same team, and their board looked like this. Because they made the decision, hey, you know, when our business is mad at us because it takes us so long to get anything done, and not surprisingly, that team never finished the work they started for a sprint. They carried over. No big surprise there, right? Pretty obvious how that happened. And they didn't really know. And I said, look at all that work that you have that's waiting. This was actually, they would have sprint planning meetings and they'd commit to new work with a board that looked like that. Because they were more invested in starting, but they didn't have the support they needed to finish. So we said, focus on getting that stuff finished first. Just reduce your work in process. We didn't radically change who their business owners were. We didn't change the size of their stories particularly. We didn't change their columns. They're exactly the same. But we said, get your work in process under control and get rid of those cues. And here's what they did. They actually do still have a cue here. That's actually a cue. But everything else, the team is collaborating to get these development stories done and to get the testing done. And stuff is moving really quickly through the board. Here's the thing. Doing that as a team, something you control, completely transforms the way you relate to your business now. Because when they ask you for something, you say, yep, I'll have that done in the week. Rather than, we blew our sprint commitment again. So here are some strategies, how you can incorporate some of these lean ideas into the way that you practice Agile to try to win over some of those business people. Sorry, losing the microphone. Try to win over some of those business people that maybe aren't totally sold on what you're doing. First, we just talked about it. Limit your work in process. You may or may not use that terminology with them, but the point here is your management and your business will get from you when you do that. They will get lower cycle times and less wasted time, which means more efficiency, higher productivity. That's what they say they want. You give that to them by something you control today, which is lowering your work in process. Commit to a smaller number of things, get them done faster. You'd be amazed at how your relationship transforms. You get benefit from doing that because you get something I know you all want, which is fewer interruptions, less context switching, and your stress level on the team goes down just from lowering your work in process, which you control. When you lower your work in process and shrink the cycle times, you're less likely to be interrupted. I say that what you're doing is you try to deliver it, you finish it before they have a chance to change their mind about it. Oh, you want to redesign? Well, here it is. Sure, I suppose I could start it all over, but you know it's working. Just, it's ready for production whenever you want. That calls for smaller items, and we know that. Scrum teaches us that as well. It calls for smaller pieces of work. That's one of the most painful places we interface with the business, right? We want to break things down to a minimum viable product, and they tell us, no, it's already minimum. Sorry. You got it. You. There we go. And they tell, is it working? And they tell us, hey, this is the minimum. It's already minimum. Nah, no gestures. Okay, fine, no more gestures. It's already minimum. We say, no, it can't really be minimum viable product. It really needs to be smaller than that. Getting them to accept smaller increments of work is difficult. But when you break them down and you deliver them anyway, you're kind of calling their bluff, right? You deliver them with a very short cycle time. And let's say you've got a quarterly or a 6-month release window, and they say, we really don't want this stuff for another 3 months. And you say, that sounds great, but you know, here's what we built last week, and it's ready if you change your mind. I'll just put it over here. All right? But no matter what, you're doing your show and tells, and you're getting that feedback from them. They also get the ability to have faster feedback from stakeholders and to give you faster feedback. They can see clearly if you go off on a track that is not what they wanted because they weren't clear about the requirement in the first place. That's one of the ways we manage changing requirements and unclear requirements. Take a tiny little piece of it and build it anyway, and then make them give you some feedback on it. Because that's when you're going to get the true answers about what they wanted. The document is full of lies. But when they see the thing that you built that they don't want, they have remarkable clarity about suddenly this is what I want. Oftentimes that is the only way to get it from them. And so for you, delivering those smaller items manages a lot of those risks. Your technical risks are managed better, that's great. But a lot of the risk about your relationship with the product team is managed better when you choose to deliver smaller items. You might end up having to guess what the minimum viable product is if you can't get them to tell you. That's okay, do it anyway. Because as they start to see that there is any value at all in having a smaller item, they'll start giving you feedback about which smaller items they would like that to be. But you can lead with that. You can control that as a development team. So you win them over by showing them that it works. And finally, something we all know we want. The Agile world calls it building quality in. It's really moving those quality activities earlier and earlier in the life cycle. The no-brainer stuff, the unit testing. Because, and this is a place where we fight with the business or with our project managers, right? Because we want time for those quality activities. And we don't feel like they want to give it to us. Push for more features, push for more features. Go ahead and rack up that technical debt. Because it looks like we're delivering lots of features. And we know that what we need to do is kind of slow that down. The way I talk about it, I've had teams that have said they've gone to their managers and asked for permission to do unit testing. I actually knew somebody who went to a product director, a business guy, not technical at all. He explained in detail what unit testing is, how it works, and that it was going to cost them 20% more time on all of their features, and could we do unit testing, please? Anybody want to guess what the answer was? So here's how I see it. I don't go to my CEO and ask for permission to do development using a monitor and a keyboard. I don't say, gee, sir, I'd be much more productive if only I could have a keyboard. There are certain things that are a given. Code takes as much time as it takes, right? Here's the thing. Nobody in business or management has any idea why code takes as long as it takes. They don't know what we do now. They already think, what the hell are they doing over there? Why does that take so long? They're mad at you anyway. You might as well let them be mad at you while you are doing the right thing and writing the unit tests that you know you need to write. Right? They don't understand what your code does. They certainly don't understand what a unit test does. It's all the same to them, and it should be. It takes as long as it takes to write code, and if you are paying attention to the benefits of quality, you know that as long as it takes includes the time it takes to write the tests. And you do that because for you, unit test is the only path to avoiding technical debt and preventing legacy code. One of the definitions of legacy code is code without tests. And I actually think that is the best definition. It's the best, most defensible definition. So you do that stuff anyway. You don't need to tell them you're doing it. And when they come and say, why are you taking so long? You don't need to say, because we're writing unit tests, sir. You don't help yourself when you do that. You do what you're supposed to do, which is you take your headphone off and you say, it takes as long as it takes. I'll tell you when I'm done. And you put it back on. That's what you do. Just keep doing that. They're going to start to see better quality software and they'll have no idea why. And here's what you know that you don't need to take the time to explain. When you build better quality software, your stakeholders report fewer bugs. When your backlog is not full of bugs, guess what it gets to be full of? Features! That's that thing they didn't want you bothering with quality so you could do more of. You know that this gets you there. So think about how to have, when you need to have an argument. Sometimes you can avoid an argument. I just talked about how to avoid an argument. When you need an argument, be aware that a lot of the terminology from Lean is stuff that will resonate. It will be meaningful to people in business roles and in management roles. They will know what waste reduction means. When you talk about blocked time or queues waiting for stage gates, when you talk about that as wasted time, they're listening. When you talk about work in process, you can explain that. That's a pretty simple term they can get. Cycle time is a great metric that is used for all kinds of things, not just software. So these are the kind of things that you can use to speak their language a little bit. And further, you can take it away from what might be lean jargon into really simple concepts that are just plain English. Faster feedback is a lean concept, but it's plain language. I suppose there's a Hungarian word for feedback, yeah? Instead of saying limit your work in process, if that starts to feel too jargony, you just say, we need to focus on the most important things first. We want to do this first and then this other thing. Finishing what we start, rather than saying, we have WIP limits and we've created a pull system and we can't push work in and we don't have capacity. You just say, we want to finish these things before we start new things. That's not hard. So you tailor your language away from some of the technical and agile and jargon terms into things that are more easily understood by people who don't have that background, and you will have a better chance of getting them to understand how you want them to work and how you want to work. Some really good metrics that you can use that also help, that illustrate your case. We talked about cycle time. I said from the time you start it to the time it gets finished. Lead time is a little bit bigger than that. Lead time is the time from when it is requested to when it is delivered. You don't control all of lead time, but lead time is the thing that makes your salespeople look stupid if it's too high, or look like heroes if it's very low. They want to turn things around to your clients really quickly. When you reduce cycle time, you can also reduce their lead time. That makes them look good. That makes them happy. That makes your clients happy. That makes your company money. Everybody wants that. And touch time, I mentioned before, it's the time you spend actually doing anything to that work item. Touch time is the sum of lots of different little times, minus all that waiting time or queue time. The more you can remove wait time from your process, the more you can make your touch time and your cycle time be equal to each other, and try to get your lead time closer to both of them. There's a little game you can play here. How often, do you guys ever have anything you would call like a hot fix or an emergency expedite item? So, how much faster do you do a hot fix? than you do your regular everyday work. Faster? What's different about a hotfix from your everyday work that makes it so much faster? It's not queuing. You're not going to let it, right? Because you're going to tell the next person, hey, I've got this hot item. I'm going to hand it to you. Be ready, be ready. Clear your plate. Hot fixes are usually very clear that that is your top priority. Everybody is on the same page with a hot fix, that everybody's top priority is this item. Nobody says, I'm sorry, I can't work on your hot fix. I have a meeting. But they do it to your everyday work all the time, right? So hotfix has clarity. It means everybody who can help is expected to drop everything and get in there and do what they can. The team comes together to work on it. And you avoid those queues. You make sure you bypass those queues. Be ready, this is coming. Right? Now you may also do some things to hotfix that you don't. You might do a hotfix with less testing than a regular thing. Because if your production system is down, the small bug you might create is not as big a deal. So it's not a perfect analog. Here's the problem. Does anybody ever have disagreements with your business about whether something is legitimately a hotfix or not? Whether it should be a hotfix?
Never ever.
No. Do you ever have arguments about whether something is a bug or a change? That's different. I'm going to tell you why that is, and I'm going to tell you why, sadly, this is a problem you've created for yourself. They're on to you. They know that if they call it a bug, you will do it faster. That's why they do it. They know that a bug is usually a higher priority, and they can get people to prioritize it. They know that you will collaborate more on it. They know that you will avoid queues with it. They don't know that that's why. When they call something a hotfix, they know that you will fix it right away. So now, because they've figured out your secret, they understand that if they call it a hotfix, that means I'll get it really fast. But this is actually useful for you, because a hotfix is a fantastic baseline metric. Just look back at your work for the last couple months. Find a hotfix that you did. How long did it take? Under ideal conditions, that's how long you can deliver software. That's how much time it takes you to deliver software. Now you have a target. Can you get your everyday work closer to that number? By doing the things we've talked about. Skipping queues, limiting work in process, prioritizing, collaborating. The hotfix gives you a metric to say, what is the best we could do under ideal conditions? That's related to kind of the family of metrics. My boss calls it the one metric to rule it all, rule them all. Time to feedback. There are a lot of different metrics that measure how fast can we get feedback on this thing. Like, this is odd, but code coverage. How many unit tests do we have? Because if I break it, I will get instant compiler-based feedback. Right? How much, if I have bugs, can I move bug detection from production to an earlier environment? Can I reduce my bugs found in production? And even if I'm increasing my bugs found in test, that's a win because my client never saw them. Right? Faster feedback. I want to find those bugs faster. We know as developers that if we find them earlier, they're cheaper to fix. Time to feedback from stakeholders. How fast from the time I get the idea can I put it in front of a client and show them what it looks like? A lot of great metrics are in there. And all metrics are made better by looking at them from a trend point of view. Instead of trying to decide what's an absolute right velocity that we should have, or what's the best cycle time that we should have, you just measure whatever the heck it is now, and just try to make it trend better. What's our bug count now? Is that a good number of bugs? I don't know. Can we make it lower? Let's trend it down. Code coverage is a really good one for that, because you might have legacy code that's 0% covered now. You're not going to get to 100. You shouldn't go to 100 anyway. You're not going to get there. It's going to be really painful to get to 60 or 70. That's untestable code. But what you can do is try to raise it from 0 to 1%. And trend it upwards. Whenever you touch that legacy system, try to make the code coverage a little higher than it was before. That means you test 1 or 2 new methods that you've added. You refactor one tiny thing. Instead of thinking, oh my God, I have to get to 60, it's impossible, never mind. You say, what can I do to make this line trend up? Ever so slightly. You get a lot better results. That's my presentation. I think it was more than half an hour. I didn't look at a clock, sorry. I hope it was okay. Do you guys have questions? Yes?
Yes, I have. You mentioned volume and you mentioned utilization doesn't give us volume. And you mentioned some metrics, and I think those metrics are good only if you have some kind of comparison. I mean, if you can compare to the past.
Yes.
But if you have, for example, 20 or more applications and you cannot make comparison.
There's a talk I can recommend to you from TechEd on the Channel 9 website. If you go into TechEd and you look for a talk called Metrics That Matter, it's given by my boss, Steve Borg. He's my boss because he's awesome. That's why I choose to work for him, not the other way around. Anyway, it's a really good talk, and it answers that question in a lot more detail than what I could do. He does talk about the 4 qualities that a good metric should have. Should be honest, should be simple, should be actionable, and it should be comparable. And so your challenge is, how do we find metrics that are comparable? So over time, you may not have the baseline data right now. You may need to build over time, because a lot of times it's those time comparisons that are useful. It will be hard to compare one app to another. We know that in Scrum, things like when we change the membership of our team, our velocity metric is invalid. We have to do it over. We can't expect the same velocity. So I don't exactly know how to answer your question in detail. But I would suggest checking out that talk. And then he will also recommend, in the talk, he recommends a bunch of really good books on metrics. If you need the details about the talk, just come see me. I'll get it to you. Any other questions about Lean, Kanban, Agile, getting along with business? Cool. Great. Thank you guys so much. And thanks for letting me use English.